Hey guys, Todd Falcone here. Most people don't know this, but the single largest growing criminal organization in the world is child sex trafficking. Many of you probably do know that I've been getting behind an organization to help eradicate sex trafficking called the Guardian Group. So in today's episode, very different than my typical network marketing training episode, I'm interviewing a woman with the Guardian Group so you can learn more about the Guardian Group itself, what they're doing to eradicate sex trafficking, and what you can possibly do to join the fight. Let's go into that episode. Hey guys, what's up? Todd Falcone here, back with another episode, and this is a very different episode than I normally do. You guys obviously plug into me for training and education, and I know that over the last several months you've heard me talking about sex trafficking, how bad it is, and an organization called the Guardian Group. So I'm here with Shannon Keith. Shannon, how's it going?
Hi, happy to be here. Tough topic, but thankful you're tackling it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shannon is the wife of the founder of Guardian Group, and I want to go back to the beginning and how you guys got involved, and I'll also just kind of share like the way I got to know Keith or Shannon and Jeff was their son is good buddies with one of my kids, and we made the connection and started hearing, I don't know if I told you this, but like Joey was all, oh yeah, his like dad was like CIA, all this crazy stuff. So I thought when I met Jeff, I was going to be like this scary military dude. And it's funny because you meet him and he's like this kind of like Southern California surf bro, and you're so super fun and delightful, and so it's totally different. It's totally different impression than I thought I was going to get. But so all right, so let's go back real quick. So you guys obviously, so Guardian Group is who is Guardian Group and what do they do? Let's start there.
Yeah, I love it. So Guardian Group is a group of quiet professionals here in the U.S. That is a nonprofit that sole mission is that women and kids would remain free from sex trafficking here in the U.S. Women and children make up, 99.99. So obviously it's not that we don't want to help boys or men. If that happens along the way, of course, we're helping every victim. But really, sex crimes here in the U.S. Against children and women are the most prevalent. And so Guardian Group works with law enforcement because, again, in the U.S., we have a rule of law that is really important to follow. So we're not just vigilantes kicking in doors and, rescuing kids. That's kind of stuff with the movies. Yeah. Sometimes that even happens in other countries. But here, we not only want to successfully recover the victims, mostly children, but we want to make sure that we can prosecute the traffickers. Yeah. And the DA can't make a case if a bunch of vigilantes go in and don't follow the rule of law. Yeah. So it's really important for people to know it doesn't sound as sexy, like, most of Guardian Group's intel side is made up of like ex-military intel professionals, amazing at what they do. These were folks that have spent a career, hunting down terrorists in other parts of the world, and now they're using those same skills to identify child victims of sex trafficking. And then, of course, they're traffickers. Law enforcement can usually get them at the same time. So it's using open source online data, really, and then serving up through a bunch of like OSINT sophisticated stuff, serving that up to law enforcement in like very formal reports. They corroborate, can find the child, recover the victim, and then hopefully, arrest the trafficker at the same time. Yeah.
And so open source, just in case you guys don't know, is like Google, for example. You can't go onto the dark web. Is there a reason why somebody, like in terms of like intel and like finding these people, why, like I've never been on the dark web, I wouldn't even know how to get there.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. And there are a lot of, heinous crimes that happen, but I think it's a little harder to prosecute.
Really?
Those sort of things, because it's almost like going in someone's house. Like you can't just go into someone's house without a warrant and getting that evidence. They would be like, oh, you didn't have a warrant, so none of that is admissible in the court of law or whatever. Yeah. That might be a elementary metaphor, but I think it's similar. Yeah. Whereas these crimes are happening in such a brazen way, we don't have to go into the dark web. I mean, 150,000 new escort ads, people posting you can buy sex, 150,000 new ads every day in the U.S., and many of those are minors. So
like this what is, minors, you like what age? Like what ages are people being trafficked?
Sadly, it's at all ages. There are cases of victims being trafficked as young as 4 years old. That is not the norm. Yeah. I will just say that is not the norm. So many people think on the ads, right? Oh, sure, she's saying she's 18 years old. You look at her and she clearly looks like 12 or 13, because again, legally, minors cannot consent for sex, so they're always going to say they're 18, even when they're not. Their trafficker is going to say. Maybe they wouldn't on the dark web say those things, but you can pretty much look at this person and know, they look pretty young.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people wanting to buy sex with minors.
Wow.
And young women. And even some young women, maybe now they are 20, but maybe they got into it and were trafficked. The average age is like 12 to 15. So again, children. We're talking, junior high, young high school girls. And without interventions, maybe now they are 20 years old or an adult, but really they were a child that could never consent in the first place.
And they're still stuck in it because they were basically brought up into that.
Exactly, and have so much sexual trauma and identity issues. I mean, the layer upon layer of trauma and lack of opportunities and self-worth, and they got into it probably because they didn't have safe adults in their life to begin with, or they wouldn't be in that situation. And it gets really complicated really fast. Sometimes the pimps will pose as like the Romeo boyfriend and will really try and kind of swoon them. It isn't so much as like, oh, I'm going to nab you off the street and throw you in the back of a van. Again, that's like more in the movies. It's more building a relationship in high school or junior high with kind of the broken or the wounded, really insecure young woman. And then taking advantage of those vulnerabilities and insecurities. And then pretty soon she has like some twisted level of love or allegiance to this person. And then he asks her to, do this thing because, oh, baby, we're going to move to Las Vegas and we need money and our car broke down and will you just do this once and we can like get back on track. And then, it's a downhill spiral from there.
What, where are these traffickers primarily finding their victims? Because here's the thing, like when I first talked to Jeff and we had to sit down at a coffee shop and I started to get to know about Guardian Group, I'm like, dude, like Bend, Oregon? He's like, oh yeah, no, it's happening right here. This 97 corridor is, a huge trafficking zone. And I mean, we live in Bend, Oregon, and it's a great place to live. But
picturesque and beautiful,
it's beautiful.
Mountain town.
And he goes, yeah, I mean, even there's girls that have been trafficked at the high school that my kid goes to. And I was like, how is that possible? Like with, on the west side of town, like nice place, and yet, somebody is being trafficked. So how are these traffickers finding? Are they other high school students?
Yeah, so it's a great question because our logical brains just cannot wrap around how can this possibly happen? And it happens in a couple of many different ways, but there are a few surefire ways that this happens, right? And online grooming is one of them.
Yeah.
So even with our own daughter, here we are, two career professionals in the anti-trafficking space for 20 years, and our own teenage daughter, when she first got her cell phone and was getting Instagram, we said, you have to have a closed account. This cannot just be open. I know every kid wants to be an influencer. They want all these followers, but it's not safe for teenage girls to have 35-year-old men following them.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And so sure enough, she thought, oh, we're prudes or whatever, and unbeknownst to us had kind of opened up her account. And Jeff had, we had this system on there called Bark. And so it was kind of barking at some suspicious activity. Oh. And sure enough, there was what he confirmed doing research later, a 35-year-old man out of Redmond posing to be a high school boy. And our daughter was 14 at the time. I think he said he was 15 or 16. So again, that is what we would call grooming.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to build a relationship, trying to build trust. Then at some point they're like, oh, hey, I'm going to be in blank, or let's meet up in blank, And so it usually starts online, and then it can go into eventually it has to, an in-person meeting. Another way, I think you had mentioned some of those students here that happened, and this can happen a lot, is the pimps can have kind of up and coming traffickers that could be in high school actually as part of their network that is grooming other girls. So what happened here, it was hey, let's go to a party, right? I have some friends and they're renting a hotel room. So again, we're not around parents. This is cool. We're going to have, alcohol and potentially drugs, and it'll be great. So they get a group of girls, because a girl probably is smart enough not to go by herself, but they're like, hey, power in numbers, we go 4 or 5 girls, we'll be fine. Well, they're not fine because they start, drinking at the hotel room. They roofie them, so they think they're just having a drink. Pretty soon, they're kind of blacked out. They end up taking their phones, their shoes to make it so you can't like easily run away, and maybe it's like winter outside. I think even one, they like cut her hair and bleached it in the hotel room, and they were then transporting them down to LA. And maybe by way of Vegas, all from this, group of high school girls thinking, oh, cool, these like college-age boys want to have us over for a party. Aren't we beautiful and pretty? And those boys are really, giving them a lot of attention and kind of, again, grooming them. But the girls just think it's flirting.
And the pimps aren't like the stereotypical pimp with the fur coat and the gold teeth and all that.
No,
I mean, they're
it's
just
not
normal.
Hollywood. And there could be some like that, sure. But in Bend, Oregon, that would stick out like a sore thumb.
Sure,
So this just looks like a high school student, maybe a little cool, maybe a little edgy, bad boy vibe, which a lot of girls like.
Yeah.
And so it really, the definition of trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. And so it's not always force. Again, that's the movies where like, I'm taking you from one place to another. That would be force. Fraud is, oh, hey, baby, like you look so beautiful. You should be a model. Have you ever thought, now this is fraud. I'm going to present one thing and then I'm going to bait and switch and something else is going to happen, right? That's just fraud. They think they're going to be a model and go to this photo shoot or whatever, because every teenage girl wants to be beautiful and loved and, And so again, they kind of like go for that sort of fairy tale weakness. And then coercion is more like what I just told you, the other story. So those are all the ways. And I think fraud and coercion are much more normal than the forced version of trafficking.
Yeah. And you guys, Guardian Group, focuses exclusively on the U.S., if I'm not mistaken, right? So
exactly, and there are lots of other great organizations who are operating in other parts of the world. Think about IJM and some other groups you may have heard of. Are focusing on other parts of the world. And sometimes, honestly, Todd, it's can be easier to say, hey, we can go in and kind of under the radar and help this problem. But again, here in the US, it's really important that we work with local law enforcement and follow the rule of law. Because again, it's not only recovering the victims, but it's being able to prosecute the traffickers. Because a trafficker, which is modern day term for pimp, will abuse between 200 and 400 victims, one person, in their lifetime or career. So it's really important that we do this the right way so that there can be good evidence and that trafficker can actually be prosecuted.
So is there a percentage, like as far as, what percentage of these traffickers are you able to get charges to stick?
That's a good question, and it's hard because Guardian Group is one level removed, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. One, it's like the safety of the Guardian Group staff and family, right? So any organized crime, there's a lot of traffickers are part of like gang activity. So these are usually not the best people and can be pretty dangerous. And so, and because of that, there is that layer of protection where the Guardian Group analysis team will serve up to law enforcement and then they take it from there. And a lot of times we don't exactly know what happens. So occasionally there's a feedback loop, but they're not required to report back and say, hey, I got that kid or whatever. But when we have good relationships, sometimes they will give testimonials. They'll come back and say, hey, that was great. We were able to recover XYZ. So we know how many leads we serve up that are like 99.99% bulletproof. But we don't exactly always know the back end. In fact, sometimes it's interesting, like we'll be watching the news or something and there was like a big sting out of Georgia and Jeff was like, oh, we were like part of that. You know what I mean? We were part of like some of the build up to that because it takes a lot of research hours and analysts being able to do their job to even get to that point. And the reason so much of this is happening still under the radar is because law enforcement is so underfunded. So if you can think back in the few recent years, there was like defund the police and that whole thing. And some of the secondary consequences that people didn't realize is things like trafficking then are not looked at because maybe some police departments get so thin and underfunded that they're just answering 911 calls or something like that. Whereas this is really proactive. It takes a lot of hours online to actually find this person, to identify that they're a minor, to identify their name, because they're not putting their real names online.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Sally Sue, but her real name is, you know, Caitlin Smith or whatever.
Yeah.
And to be able to do all that takes a lot of hours. And so you don't have a lot of police force hours like sitting behind the desk at a computer doing this stuff. And that's where Guardian Group goes in to fill this huge gap.
So, yeah, so what you're saying is, so law enforcement, they're not the ones that are going out there and finding the traffickers and the victims. Your whole role is to identify girls, boys, young women that are being trafficked, put together the evidence, if you will, and then you guys have this whole program with a task force, and so where you go in and it's not, you end up going in and basically handing the police department a file, your researchers, your analysts, and it's like all the data, all the information is there, and then you pass it off to them, and then between law enforcement and the information that you provide them, and then the task force, but who's involved in the task force? That's like counselors and therapists?
Yeah, so really, it's kind of a separate issue from law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement will be involved as well, but really there's a whole like cascade of services that victims and survivors of trafficking need once they're out of that horrible situation, right? So then law enforcement can then know, oh, you know, here in our region, like in Central Oregon, we have a task force that law enforcement would know that like DHS is involved in, counseling, you know, all of those, like, is this person like a minor? Again, we really focus on minors. So what's temporary housing or sheltered? Are they going to go in like a group home right away? Or is there a shelter specifically that would help meet their needs while they get medical care, you know, plugged back into like sort of normal society? So that's where that comes in, really, for what we would call victim services. On the other end, you were right. We, Guardian Group gives, they're called, I don't know what the official title is, but they're basically lead reports, I believe they're called. And then law enforcement, of course, they have to do some time corroborating. You know, we make sure, like they said, they're pretty bulletproof, because we're not going to give junk to law enforcement where they go and waste their time and they're like, what the heck did Guardian Group just give us? Like every time we want it to be a home run.
Yeah.
So when they corroborate it, they're like, yep, okay, that checks off, because they have systems where they can, if they have all the information, they can pinpoint. So they're corroborating that and then going off of that, and now they can recover the victim.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, hopefully there's so many cases where they not only cover that victim, but they recover other victims that maybe we didn't notify, because again, one trafficker or pimp isn't just victimizing this one person that we found. So there's usually, like, sadly, they call them like a stable.
A stable.
Because a lot of pimps,
term.
will refer to the women and kids working under them as animals, like a stable. It's horrible.
Yeah.
So there's a group of other people usually associated with this trafficker, and so hopefully through this one person, they can either physically see other people, or they can tip us off to then other victims that need help, and then again, that trafficker can be prosecuted.
Wow. How did you get into this? Like, how did this whole thing evolve?
I feel like it's kind of divine. For me, it was a divine appointment. I feel like literally God called me to do this work 20 years ago. And how that happened was my husband, who you mentioned is the founder of Guardian Group, Jeff. He was a pastor at our church in Southern California. And part of his responsibilities was like local and global outreach. So efforts that the church was doing basically for the poor and like marginalized communities. And so we went on a trip, this was back in like 2004, I think, to India, fell in love with the people, like what was going on there. It was amazing. That was right when, I don't know if you remember that long ago, the big tsunami hit, all of that. So we were helping to do like relief work, because people were just like dying and their whole villages were washed away, and they were like fishermen and their nets were gone and they were starving, and you know, all this stuff. So we kind of came to do that work. We went back the next year and were confronted directly with this issue of trafficking. So the NGO we were working with, some of it came out of the tsunami, some of it is just cultural. Trafficking in India looks very different than it does here. You have generations based on the caste system. You're like born into this, so women are born into it through lack of education and opportunity. So there's temple prostitution, that's sex trafficking. So it's a whole other thing. But that's how we got exposed. I started a nonprofit that now has a for-profit arm. So it's like a hybrid organization, a for-profit and nonprofit. Called Sudara, that was to provide jobs for women so they would have a different way of supporting themselves and their children.
Yeah.
Many of the trafficking victims in India have lots of kids because condom use isn't a thing, and it's a very patriarchal society, and if the Johns don't want to use a condom, the women can't make them, and so there's a lot of kids that come out of that situation. And women will do anything to support their kids. So they'll continue to sell their bodies. But if they have another choice there, a lot of times they'll take it because this isn't a Romeo pimp situation, So a lot of times women will take that alternative. Where here, if that young woman who I described really feels like she's in love with that boyfriend who turned in to be her pimp trafficker, and maybe now she has a child and that's now the baby daddy, like it's very hard for her to turn on that person.
Yeah.
And so that's where sometimes, intervention through law enforcement and whatnot, just telling a young woman like that, hey, we have another option for you. You could live in this home. We could support you. She's like, I don't trust you. No, thanks. So here it looks very different. But that's how I got started. So at the time, Jeff was still a pastor. Fast forward like 5 years. Well, even then, he came home and was like, what's happening in the U.S.? Like, is this even happening there? I was doing a lot of research on like the U.S. State Department tip report, trafficking in person. It was a lot about what was going on overseas. There wasn't that much about what was going on here. So he rolled up his sleeves, did a lot of research, and ended up leaving the church and starting Guardian Group as a full-time work about 15 years ago.
Wow.
Because he was just like, his heart was so broken. And especially as, he's a father of 3. We have 3 children of our own, and just could not fathom that there are kids out there who have no dads and no one's looking for them. He was like, I cannot live in a world where I'm not at least trying to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So how can folks that are watching this help? Is there any way that my audience who is watching can be of any assistance to the Guardian Group?
Yes.
Yes.
This is my favorite question, especially to a person like you who is an expert in marketing, which is basically just getting the message out, right? Getting the message out to people. And I think those of you maybe that are watching and following Todd are interested in that too. And to be quite honest, Guardian Group has been so hyper-focused on the program, which really is all about finding these minor victims and supporting law enforcement to recover them, and then secondarily getting the traffickers prosecuted, that they really haven't focused on marketing at all and storytelling. Now, they have done a lot of good work of like, oh, maybe we should get out a newsletter. We are a 501c3, so a nonprofit. We need donors. Like, we need to keep the lights on to do this work. I will say all of the services to law enforcement is free. They don't have the budgets to be paying Guardian Group for this information, and so Guardian Group really has to be self-funded. So the way the audience could help is getting the word out. A really super exciting kind of one-of-a-kind technology that they've created really over the last 5 years, but it was launched 2 years ago, is called Project 1591.
Yeah.
And that is sort of a crowdsourced community that are really OSINT trained. So this is that technology where you can find people. You don't just have to be a military background, but there are quite a few people from the 3-letter agencies, whether that's CIA, FBI, all of the things.
Yeah.
But there are other people too who do like kind of cybersecurity stuff and are familiar with this. And so you can go on as a volunteer onto our website, and I think it's about an 8 to 12 hour training. You have to pass 3 different tests.
I've gone through it.
If that's you, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that's you. And you can actually then, you have to pass, these tests, but you can help find victims, which is really amazing.
Yeah.
So now we have a team, I think right now there's 170 individuals who are not just in the pipeline, but who've actually passed the test and are now looking for victims. And so what happens is all of these volunteers, just again, crowdsourcing all of these hours spent, then serve up internally on our proprietary sort of software to our analysts, which are our Guardian Group employees. Those are the ones mostly who've come out of like the military intelligence here. And they, again, kind of corroborate, yes, 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 check the box. This volunteer served up a really good lead. They put some finishing touches on it and then turn that over, and now to law enforcement. So what is so exciting is, we had a few analysts and now we have many more. So if you're out there and you're one of those people, great, like please do that. If you're not, we are developing and have what we call Team 1591, and that's actually the penal code that says it's illegal to buy kids for sex in the U.S.
Yeah.
So that's the penal code 1591. That's why it's called that. And so for the 97% of us, like me out there, who is not an OSINT professional, we still have a big role to play, and that really is around telling the story, educating ourselves, talking about it with our kids, making sure they're safe online, donating money, and also posting about it. Like Todd here is a perfect example of a guy who maybe isn't OSINT trained, or maybe you are, you said he went through it, but either way is using his platform and network and community to get the word out in a really significant way. So those are really the ways that, if you're OSINT trained, great. If you're not, we still want you. And if you can give money, like also that is just a reality in the nonprofit space, that it takes money to keep the lights on and to keep those programs going.
Yeah. And just so you guys know, like when I met Jeff, Carla and I sat down and had a conversation with him. I had no idea how bad the sex trafficking was. I mean, I know it exists. I think a lot of people are, especially like when it's in your backyard. First, it's like, no way, that's not happening. That's how I was. I was sitting in the coffee shop. I'm like, no, come on, man. Like, no, dude. Right down the street, we've got this house that we have girls in that were just pulled out of trafficking. I was like, wait, what? In this town? He's like, yeah, in this town. He goes, blow your mind how much it's actually present. And I mean, it's like every big and small town in America. And as a father of two boys, I'm like for me, like I want kids to maintain their innocence, and like I remember like Joey, Joey. So like he's 13, he's still believing in Santa Claus. It's like making me tear up.
He's such a good kid.
You want children to be safe and secure and in a good spot, and the fact that these kids are being, convinced that, oh, I'm your boyfriend, or taken, or however it is, and being pulled into something that in nobody's world should ever be in. Mm-hmm. Like I just felt compelled to be involved with you guys in whatever capacity that I can be involved in. And just so you guys know, like this whole idea, there's two ways that you can immediately be of assistance. Like if you're like a web searcher, like I went through the whole program. Like it's an anonymous process where it was very educational for me, because I was learned all the terminology and the lingo around trafficking and what to look for, and you have to go through this process and then pass it. So if you have free time, you could become an analyst, like a volunteer analyst, and help the Guardian Group find these victims and put these traffickers behind bars. And so, in-house here, we're actually in the offices right now, they have full-time analysts. And then so the money that is raised, look, here's the other thing. If you know high net worth people, people that are running companies that have budgets for different organizations, they need money. And all of the dollars that go into the Guardian Group is really designed to, hire another full-time analyst. And I think when talking with Jeff, if I recall correctly, like the average full-time analyst can save somewhere between 100 and 200 kids annually. I think that was like statistically what he shared with me.
Yeah, in terms of the time it would take for that internal analyst to then have kind of like a cadre of these volunteers under them. So they're managing them, vetting, and then rolling up. But I think you're spot on, Todd, in that it's such a complex issue, but the solution that Guardian Group has found is pretty simple and scalable. And it's taken us a while to get here. So the beautiful part of our story and our journey is like, we're not some flash in the pan organization. We've been at this, for 2 decades, myself and Jeff specifically with Guardian Group for 15 years. Trial and error and what's going to work and building trust with law enforcement and doing all of the things. And we have finally found a beautiful, scalable solution, particularly now that we can not have to hire so many analysts, but we can really crowdsource this, as you're saying, and for people volunteering as much as they can. It could be 2 hours a week, it could be 2 hours a month, it could be 2 hours a quarter. It really doesn't matter. It's however much time you can give, you can do exactly what you said. You can literally partner with Guardian Group, save a child, and potentially help get a trafficker put behind bars. I mean, I don't know how much more like satisfying your volunteer hours could be than that.
Yeah, as you're saying that, like most of you guys that are watching this, you're network marketers. Like that's what we build, networks, and it's referral to referral to referral to referral. I mean, if you have this heart that you're like, man, I want to get behind this, and especially the fact that you focus exclusively on the U.S., which is great, because I know there's some other incredible organizations that are doing great work, but they're like literally in there banging down doors because they can do it in India or Central or South America. Mm-hmm. And there's just laws here that, if we're going to make charges stick, as much as I'd like to go, bust a door down and get a trafficker, we just can't do it. So if you feel compelled to learn more about Guardian Group, the website for the company is guardiangroup.org. That's the main website. You can learn about Team 1591 and Project 1591. Mm-hmm. And then again, I'm going to just ask you guys hey, I got friends that are super rich, got tons of money, or company owners that I know, and we want to get the word out. Like you guys are natural networkers. So mm-hmm. whether you feel compelled to like, man, if I can get in there and Google search and go find somebody and like save a person, you're literally doing God's work. I mean, you're doing mm-hmm. incredible work, and it's frightening because I've been in here with some of the former military ops people that work for the company, and I've been privy to hearing some stories that it's hard to break me or shock me, but I'm just like, what did you just say?
Yeah.
Like what? Floored. There are some very sick human beings out there that are doing awful things to children, young women, young boys and girls, and I can just tell you right now, like I don't care how small a town you're in, it's probably happening, and it's one of those things that it's not right out in the open, right? You don't even know. Like,
people aren't going to do those heinous crimes out in the open, right?
No.
I mean, it is under the guise of darkness. And the sad part, Todd, is there's so many good things about the internet, right? And the fact that we can, communicate and we can use it for good, but we can definitely use it for evil. And gone are the days when the guy had to be like creepy on the other side of the tracks, like calling the girl over from the street corner, hopefully not being seen by anyone. You know what I mean? That was like hard enough. But now, like all of that is taken away. So you can be so brazen and go to your like sickest instinct, just base debauchery, because you don't have to verbalize that to anyone. You can just, put it in the computer and whatever, and it's all good in your mind. And a lot of this, again, the crimes are not happening in like random street alleys. They're happening in hotel rooms, mostly by men. It's not that women aren't part of it. They're definitely kind of part of the whole like evil system. But it's typically men who can afford to buy sex who are the ones doing it.
Yeah, like the majority of it is like 6-figure plus earner men.
Yeah, because who else is going to, this is not $20 to have sex with someone, right?
Yeah,
so you're spending, I don't know exactly what it is, but probably $200 to a few $100s on this interaction. And so, your homeless guy doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Those aren't the people who are doing this. And so everyone has a part to play. And if you have any questions, I would love to be, in communication with you, because as I was saying, we are now in a phase where we know this solution is working, it's scalable, and now it's time for us kind of marketers and spokespeople of the world who aren't shy to get the message out. That really is our mandate at this phase, because we can turn the needle on this and just make it so hard for these guys to do business that they do something else. Because it's so easy right now. A lot of organized crime gangs, they've been like, man, it's hard to import drugs.
Yeah. Kids are easier.
Kids are easier.
Yeah.
And a kilo of Coke goes fast.
Yeah.
Like a child, sadly enough, you can abuse over and over and over again, night after night.
For years.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the harsh reality. And so we're just saying, not on our watch. We are not okay. And, as citizens of this great country, it's our civic duty. It's a moral obligation, but it's also our civic duty to get involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, at the very least, if you have children, like if I had to go back in time and do it all over again, honestly, my kids wouldn't have a device in their hands until they were like 30.
I know. We waited till like 14, and we were still like the most evil parents because they were like almost in high school before they got a cell phone.
It's crazy the stuff that they're exposed to. They're on whatever. They're on Instagram. They're on Snapchat. They're on all these different things. And
I know we did not let our daughter be on Snapchat till she was 18. So at that time, we were like, okay, you're an adult. She's like, I'm an adult. I'm getting on here. And we're like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we're not supporting that
No.
Until you're an adult. So I do think for parents, there are ways to educate yourself and really help train yourself and your child on what to look for. Because again, these crimes are happening online. Girls are being coerced online. And even if it's not your child, maybe they could see signs in a classmate or someone else who is more vulnerable. So it's really important for us to all know the signs. And to Todd's point, you can go through the training. I am going to be, suggesting here soon that we really open up that training to everyone, not just the OSINT folks, and they could go and take the test, but that everyone could benefit from the training. So you can go on, sign up for the training, and get yourself educated and your family.
Yeah, and the training is completely anonymous. So
yeah, and free.
Yeah, free, and I mean it's eye-opening, and it's not easy to pass. I'll tell you that. Like,
yeah, but you don't have to pass it. If you're not that awesome person, I think you can benefit from the training.
Oh, 100%.
And then just say, okay, now I want to just help be a marketer.
Yeah.
For this.
It's funny because I was like, oh, wait a second, because there's a section in there about like hotels, and I'm like, I've been in thousands of hotels as a speaker, and I'm like, oh, I've probably. Now that, I'm educated on this, I'll see it like some girl's walking by and she's like not giving eye contact and she's with some dude, and I'm like, oh, she's probably being trafficked. And I know you guys have had a program too where you like work with educating hotels on what to look for.
Yeah, that's really how we started. And that is still sort of there. I mean, we have excellent training still, but, the problem is, that wasn't enough. Our initial assumption was that once hotel, like the front desk staff or the housekeeping is trained, like that's where we're going to be getting all of our leads.
Yeah.
And that assumption was false
Yeah.
because the crimes are happening there, but hotels are kind of doing their best, but they also don't want to admit that it's happening because then they're sort of complicit in the crimes, and it's just a huge legal issue for them. So a lot of them will like check a box, yep, we took a training, and then they're like, put it to bed. They're kind of done with it. So it wasn't effective in actually recovering victims, which is what we're about. It's not just identifying, oh, we think that is someone, and then maybe they're only there a few hours and they're gone or whatever. So the way, so that really was sort of our first kind of entry point into trying to crack this nut. But finding that this now through Project 1591 is the way that we're seeing so much more movement. I mean, I think in the last 2 years that it's been live, we have helped identify as many as we did the first 12 years. You know what I mean?
The crowdsourcing.
Yes, it just sped things up, and was really, touch points, because every one of us, whether you know it or not, you have a huge digital footprint.
Yeah.
That is like indelible.
Yeah.
Really. So those in-person fleeting interactions in a hotel where I think this is or not, that is like speculation, and maybe we don't know. But online, you have this footprint, and so when we can ID people there through our team and the analysts can give it to law enforcement, like I said, it's pretty much bulletproof. It's not just a tip.
Yeah.
It's like the real deal.
So I have a question. Like in the movies, they're stolen, shoved into the back of a van, whatever, taken, and that stuff happens. It does definitely happen. But are there victims that are being trafficked currently where they're still living at home? Yes,
and that is the most heartbreaking thing when you're talking about being brought to tears. This always brings me to tears talking about it. So there are families that will traffic their own kids. And so, these are usually not right-minded folks. They are making really bad decisions because they themselves are damaged in many ways, emotionally, mentally, based on their own prior abuse, usually. And so sometimes it's this generational abuse cycle that we see. Sometimes it's addiction issues. So you'll have parents strung out on drugs that use their children
for drug money,
yeah. Or for drugs themselves. Some teens on the street will like kind of traffic themselves for survival sex and places to stay, food. They're minors, they can't consent to sex, so this still is not legal. So there's lots of ways that kids end up in this horrible situation. But I feel like the deepest, worst betrayal, I can't imagine anything worse than being trafficked by your own family. Because then, where do you go? So now...
Yeah, there's no safe place.
There's no safe place. And that's a really hard decision to make. But, then those kids are taken away from their parents, out of those homes, clearly for good reason. And yet, have a really hard time reconciling all of that, into adulthood. It's a lifelong struggle. That layer and type of betrayal is not it's not an easy hurdle to overcome.
A lot of healing.
Those victims have a lifetime, literally a lifetime of healing, because, with victims of that level of abuse, their own rates of self-harm and suicide and addiction issues and whatever, not surprisingly go up.
Yeah. And I was talking to Jeff one time, and he's like, yeah, no, we've had victims where, like, you got two working parents that are working full time, and the trafficker, like, gets them from school, makes them turn a handful of tricks or whatever, and then has them home by dinner time.
And it's horrible because they will usually use threats of harming their family to keep them quiet, right? So there's so much psychological as well as physical and emotional abuse. So these are bad people.
Yeah.
The victims know it. They're clearly abusing them and making them do these horrible things. And they will say, like, you can't tell anyone, we will kill your parents. We will, so then of course that child that's being manipulated and traumatized feels like that's true. This person is evil and they will kill my family. Yeah. Now I can't say anything because now I'm protecting my family.
Yeah. It's
they just do the worst of the worst of the worst. And these are children who, to your point earlier, that deserve to have an innocent childhood. It's hard enough when you become an adult and are disillusioned by how messed up the world is. Yeah. Like, you shouldn't have to come to that realization sooner. I think we all get there, So it is a really worthy cause. I know there's so many causes out there to get behind. Sometimes people describe it as compassion fatigue. Like, look, this is happening, that's happening,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, basic freedom for children, is, I think, a very worthy cause to spend your time and resources on.
No doubt, no doubt. So again, where can my audience reach out to you guys?
Yes, the website is a great place to start. There are places where you can reach us, and it's not just like a robot who will get back to you, like human beings will get back to you, but it's a really good place to start. You could donate online there. You could get in touch with us in the comments section. One thing that you mentioned that I did want to touch on is we have had really amazing success with businesses taking us on as a cause. And it not only gives, like, the owners, and you get a tax break, maybe you set aside a certain amount, like you said, but there's been beautiful employee engagement, which is kind of a secondary feel good, where an employee working at the Subaru dealership can feel really good about, wow, look at the type of place I work for. Look at this, we're doing this big check and ribbon cutting, and I get to be involved. And you know what I mean? And it's a really beautiful thing where then employees can go, wow, we are working for something bigger than ourselves. And then sometimes they go on and get involved and want to go through the training, separate from what their company was doing. We have a group of internet providers on the East Coast. I think it's a network of like 800 separate companies under one umbrella that has sort of taken us on. Yeah. And we are really excited about what that looks like for employee engagement. Some of those businesses are giving as a business, like for $15.91, they're giving like, $1,591 a month from their business. They're encouraging their employees to give $15.91. They're doing an employee match. I mean, it's getting really fun and creative.
Yeah.
And in a way that's authentic, I feel like, and that it's beyond just like writing a check, right? You can actually be part of engaging with Guardian Group in a really authentic way. And that's what we're trying to build, a community that is invested, that is sort of together in this, and that is of like mind. We don't just want people's checks. Like, yes, we need resources, but we really want, people's heart and humanity in this.
Yeah, yeah. And just so you guys know, I'm in the corporate office right now. I'm not going to move the camera and take it around, but this is not some luxurious, walk out and the CEO is like driving a 7 Series BMW, and I'm always a little bit. I'm just going to be blunt because you guys already know that.
That's your charm.
I'm very straightforward, but it's like when I can just tell you right now that if you choose to give to the Guardian Group, those funds they're going to use. I've worked with other organizations, or even honestly churches that I've gone to, where and God wants us to be incredibly successful and all of that, but when my pastor rolls up in a $100,000. I went to this one church, and this guy's driving a $100,000 car. He's got a $50,000 watch on. He's got $800 shoes.
You're like, wow.
I'm like, dude. I mean, it's like maybe it'd be a little bit more low key than that.
Yeah.
It's like, where's my tithing going, right? So,
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of throw that out for you guys, because truly, if you decide to get involved at any level, whether it's Project 1591, Team 1591, or you're like, hey man, I know some people that would love to get behind this, just know that it's going to help kids, women, children get out of sex trafficking and put these guys behind bars, because there's just so much evil that's going on, and they are doing good work. So
thank you. Well, so are you.
Well, I appreciate it.
And you can too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's do this. We can do this.
We can do it. We can do it. So again, guardiangroup.org, and whatever you want to do, but I just wanted to do this post. I mean, it's totally unusual. Like every week, Todd's training, and all of a sudden it's like, what's this blog post about? What's this episode about? Well, I wanted to do this for a while, and Shannon was nice enough to sit down with me and have a chat. So
well, I really appreciate it. It just shows where your heart is, We can get so hyper-focused, and it's important, as you said, to be successful and to feed our families and to do those things, and those are all good things. And at the same time, we can help kids who that isn't their current reality.
Yeah. And especially you parents, you love your kids.
Yeah.
And when it's probably a big percentage of my audience are parents, right? You got kids, you love your children, you always want to be protective. I would do anything for my children.
Yep.
And to know that other kids are forced into situations that are ugly, we'd love your help. So guardiangroup.org. So
yeah, I would love to have a conversation with you. Hit me up.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Todd.
I appreciate it.